Okay. Hi, I'm Vincent Hudson. I'm the Executive Director of Service Design at Hiveworks. I've been at Hiveworks for about a year, and Hiveworks originally started as Orange's in-house digital agency, Orange the telco, when Orange wrapped up their business in the UK. Our CEO and founder spun the business out of that and created Hiveworks, which used to be a full-service digital agency. And then recently he decided to pivot to a service design studio, and that's where I've come in. So setting up the service design practice, hiring the staff, and working with new and existing clients such as Orange, BNP Paribas, and Renault Credits, to name a few. So I've been doing service design there. Prior to that, I was a director of user experience at Digitas LBI, where I got to work within the digital transformation program at Lloyds Banking Group, and also do a digital transformation project for Cathay Pacific for 2.5 years. I was head of user experience at Wonderman before that. Then I was in LA before that. So that's a bit of my journey.
Great, thanks. Jack?
So my name's Jack Collier, and I head up a little unit inside the Ministry of Justice, Digital, which is called User-Centered Policy Design. It's something that's quite new to government, and it's quite new to justice, and it's about embedding skills such as user insight and service design into policy-making teams right at the heart of government. And how I got there was I actually used to be a policymaker. I joined the digital team, and I kind of have worked on a lot of policy programs which haven't been very successful. And actually, the skills that we've got in digital teams, I felt were really, really important for making successful policies. And so it's been my mission over the last 2 or 3 years to try and get those skills working at the centre of government. For the last 2 years, I've been working on a program about improving or reducing parental conflict for families. But we now broadened the program and we're working with multiple policy teams. 2 we're working with at the moment are victim services, so victims of terrorism, victims of homicide, victims of sexual violence, and youth offending as well.
Thank you. Margus?
I just have to ask, victims of homicide, how do you help them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's the families of victims of homicide.
Okay. My name is Margus Klaar. I am a Swiss, Swedish, Canadian, Estonian, and I got here by accident. I don't have an impressive resume like that. I work in a company called Brand Manual, which we started in 2009 as a service design and branding consultancy, which is sort of a unique combination as far as I know in the world, still. And it's founded on a very simple principle that brands are what they do, not what they say. So you have to deliver the experience, not the communication. And we started in 2009, 2013 we expanded to Sweden. And our clients I've worked with is from A to Z. So actually I've done everything from medical, complex medical, chronic disease redesign for clinics to craft beers and back again, so it's like absolutely everything.
Are they related?
Well, you take too much of one and you end up in the other, sort of, so yeah. And my background other than that is I used to work very long in advertising in different international agencies, Bates, Saatchi, McCann, and so forth and so on, as creative director, slash planner, slash CEO, slash cleaner occasionally. So, you know, done it, been there and done that.
Great, thank you. Roman?
Hello, my name's Roman Schoenboom. I'm just German, no mix. My BA is in graphic communication advertisement. I thought I can save the world with advertisement, to realize quickly not. And then I looked for something, did research, and find out there is something called service design. And I thought, this is amazing. I could really help people. And interestingly enough, you can't find postgraduate studies in Germany for service design. That's why I had to go somewhere else, either Nordic countries or London. And then I decided to come to London. Did 2 years at the Royal College of Art, master. And after this, I worked for Fjord, when they still be Fjord and not acquired by Accenture. Liveworks, a small service design agency, then at the Ministry of Justice as well. And since 20 months, I'm now senior service designer for Tesco, which I will leave soon.
We'll get into that in a bit. More of that to come. So thank you, gents. Great to hear your wonderful stories and journeys here. So first up, I'm going to ask you to describe what service design is to you, but I'm actually going to put up an image, and I'd like you all to debate whether this is a bit contentious or not. Whoever would like to go first, please jump in and let me know whether you agree or disagree, and what service design means to you. I'm going to pick someone out if you... Vincent.
Yeah, it's a lot of circles within other circles, and they all have letters, and there's a few words. I think, yesterday in one of the panels, like a similar question was asked. I can't remember her name. Maybe it was Amanda or someone who's from New Media, I think. And the first question that was asked to her was, how do you define service design? And she gave a very well-reasoned answer and talked about, it's very holistic and it covers sort of the front of the house and the back of the house. And then I was thinking of the metaphor that we use quite often to communicate it about, it's looking at everything holistically, and it's, you have all the world's a stage, and the front stage and the back stage and behind the scenes. And I just think it's one of those things where, yes, we can all come up with definitions about it. I could say a lot of words that are defined, and I have some decks that sort of define it, but really, as a group, the definitions of these things are things that just keep evolving time after time after time. I remember starting out in sort of digital in the late 90s, before user experience was a term, long before service design was a term, and we were all trying to figure out what we were doing. And at that point, the popular term was information architecture, and there were no social groups or anything like that. One of the key areas that we used to talk about information architecture was an email listserv that was from the Association of Information Science and Technology. And on that forum, there was constantly a debate, what is information architecture, and everyone talking about it. And then user experience became the term. What is user experience? And everyone's talking about it for years. And now we have, what is service design? Everyone's going to talk about it for years. So I think we all kind of do it, and we all practice it in a different way, and it'll grow and evolve and everything like that. But yeah, I mean, if you want to use that diagram for it, it's fine, but...
I don't necessarily. I just thought it would strike some debate. So yeah.
I'm not always fussed on the definitions, I guess.
Okay, great. Jack?
Yeah, so I guess I've got into a lot of trouble before with heads of design about what service design is. Not with Eileen, though.
Head of design, is that right?
And that, I guess, so I'm not a service designer is the first thing to say. So I've got an outside-in perspective.
An imposter?
Yeah, I'm an imposter.
How do you get on the service designer?
And really, in the Ministry of Justice and in government, we've got lots of teams who are designing stuff, whether or not they call them designers. So we've got policy teams who are making legislation about X, Y, and Z, They're designing things, ultimately, because they're solving problems. Service design for us at the Ministry of Justice, I think, is not what an individual does. It's what a team does, and the team should be built around the service that we're trying to build. So that might include some of those circles, but there's things like data that, for example, aren't on there, and actually some of the problems that we've got in the Ministry of Justice are around data and allowing people to access the right data at the right time, and that could be described as a service. In government, we get quite mixed up with the term service and product and journeys and things like this. But actually, for us, service design is a way of thinking. And we don't really have service designers. We've got people who work to design services.
Great, good response, Margus.
I think it's a little bit like porn.
So
I can't.
Not that many people interested in it. So.
It's.
A lot more people.
No, but I mean,
Full house.
it's in the sense you can't define it, but everybody knows it when you see it. So, I mean, service design is...
But what's good service design look like?
Oh, man.
Let's not go there. But, I mean, the way, I mean, again, it depends on how you work with it, but I think, I mean, if you're looking at where business is going right now, the thing is that quality is totally universal. I mean, everything you can make, somebody else can make equally well in quite a short amount of time. So it's about, in the sense of, it's about creating a customer experience that people actually share, and that's taking away hurdles on the way, from need to satisfaction, which is a fairly long journey, and not focusing on the moment of transaction. And in that sense, that outer circle makes sense, because it's the customer journey is a very, very long one. If you're buying a house, it can be 2 years, but the moment of transaction, where you're actually going to the bank, getting a loan and getting the paper signed, might take a week. So if you're focusing on your 1 week there as a bank, then you're missing out on 90% of the journey. And you're focusing on operational things that yes, you can improve, but the customer's journey is what you should be focusing on. So in that sense, I hate the word holistic. I hate all the buzzwords. I mean, it's so stupid, but it is really looking at from need to satisfaction, what's going on there and what can you improve.
Thank you. Yeah, it's almost, you're getting into sort of mechanistic versus systems thinking, but that was yesterday's panel. So, Roman.
Wrong panel then. Well, I mean, yeah. It's been said a lot. It makes sense as a visual. I probably would not agree with it. I like the outer layer. I like holistic because you need to kind of have a holistic point of view on the journey and include all those other experience or other disciplines. How I pitch it at Tesco is in 3 ways, because we used to start with design thinking, which was coined by IDEO, and kind of getting into, so people still have that in their mind. And what I find with non-designers in a retail space, they do get design thinking faster than service design, because I use design to think through and then deliver a problem. So they get this kind of term. So I have design thinking, got service design, and the customer experience. So these are the 3 main keywords which are buzzing around in our organization. And so I say, well, design thinking is the process. If we think about the double diamond, or how Google uses it with the circles, or IDEO has 5 steps, you have to go through a process. What do we use within the process? Well, we need to do research, we need to do analysis, we send out diary studies, we do shadowing. These are all methodologies which we use within service design. So service design are actually the tools, and then the customer experience is the aim of the process. So we want to make sure by going through a process of 4 steps, 5 steps, 6 steps, whatever works for you, using the right amount of tools to get research out, insights, and analysis to develop a great customer experience. And as soon as I pitch it with those 3 words, people kind of get what we try to achieve in a holistic way.
Yeah, see how many times we get holistic into this panel. So, are we reaching a utopia?
With what? With what?
With service design, do you think is it? Are we almost there in our design process development, and do you think it will always evolve and
I think it will just keep evolving, and I think it's something that that we see. I mean, when we run these workshops, whether it's here at these places or we work with clients or whatever, I mean, we have a bit of a toolkit and we have methods and we apply those to different problems to come up with different solutions. But they're not they're not kind of one size fits all things. They're not recipes. Where if you do these things in this order and you turn on the oven to 200 degrees and you wait 15 minutes, you'll have a cake or whatever it is. They're always informed by what we do and then by what we share with the rest of the community, and how everyone moves it on. And sometimes those advances happen in small little steps, and sometimes they happen in great big leaps. But I think we've seen it over the past several years, like design and thinking, and this discipline of user-driven design and everything evolve. And I think it'll continue to evolve. I don't think there will ever be a utopia. I think it'll just keep changing and evolving, and we'll just have to change with it.
Yeah, I don't think we're anywhere close to a utopia. So I think we've got to remember that we're in a little tribe of people that use service design in one way. So we come across policy teams in the Ministry of Justice, for example, that have been calling themselves service design and delivery for like the last 20 years, but I've never used the word service design or the word service design the way we use them. And then we're sandwiched on the other side with GDS that say service designers have to be able to code because that's the material they need to work with. But actually, most of our transactions in government are actually face-to-face and on the phone. So, but they're calling that service design as well. So we've got to remember, I think, that we're in little tribes and we're using service design in different ways. And so when you talk about Utopia, we might have come to a really nice definition in our little tribe, but someone else is using it a different way somewhere else.
I actually would like to get to a simple topia, because if you try to, I found a list, I can't really recall what source it was, but I found a list once which tries to outline all the design disciplines which there are, and there are so many, and you have subsections and this and this and this, and in the end it's really just about, we use design to solve the problem. So a phrase coined as design thinking, which is around for many, many years, which people get, will probably survive, and things like service design, where we still struggle to find a very clear definition in comparison to when we talk about product design or web design. People know what that is and they kind of get an idea. If I go back and talk to my community in Germany, to my grandparents, I'm not saying I'm a service designer, because I directly know that I go into a whirlwind which I can't get out of. In terms of explanation, I say I'm a business consultant, because this is what I do. I go with my skill set called service design and I help businesses to understand stuff. So it will all get simpler, because nobody, I mean, if you solve a great thing, then nobody really cares how this is called.
Like a karaoke song. Actually, that segues really well into my question, because it just seems like there's a lot of intersection, like a lot of the rhetoric and the methodologies you guys are referencing. Seems like, yeah, it's borrowing a lot of the language and stuff from program management as well as business and analysis and so on. So like, I come from a pretty big corporate, so where there are actually specific departments that already do this in some capacity or another. So in order to introduce the service design methodologies, like what are some of the ways in which we can introduce it without having to like step on their toes, or how can I show its value without being threatening? If you guys had experiences in bigger organizations, I'm assuming Tesco had something as annoying or as big as this. I feel like.
Here we go. So, in my talk I said show, don't tell. So I think this was the way we try to approach it. We use specific projects to show them how to do it and show them the value by doing it in that particular way, opening that up, writing case studies about it. One of the, you're right, you have to be in corporates, and I found that in Tesco, you have to be very careful when you come into a room and introduce yourself as the new guy, because there's straight away no trust. So I always say, well, kind of do your job with a little extra skill or something like this. I'm trying to be one of them. People are very receptive to new things in those old organizations because they're comfortable, they have their structures, it all works, and then suddenly a youngster like me comes in and say, hey, well, you have to change because it's not efficient. So yeah, we try to use a lot of all of our channels to communicate the value, like blog posts, meeting notes and everything.
It feels like it's like an outside appendage, and
yeah.
like you're always trying to interject your way in rather than like you being in the middle and going across all the different organizations. So yeah, I guess that's the challenge that I'm trying to overcome and hoping to get some saved by it.
I mean, sort of the way I look at it is there's one magic ingredient in service design or customer-centered design. It's empathy. I mean, without that, you can't do anything. So when we work with larger organizations, I mean, the challenge and really the whole task until you can talk about the nitty-gritty is trying to get them to understand or actually empathize with whom they're working for. And that is once you get over that hurdle, then you can start applying tools and methods and everything else. But until they actually can see it from the customer's point of view for real and feel it, not I intellectually understand that this may be difficult if you only have 4 fingers, but you actually do it, then you get a connection, because then they get it. And I think that's the same thing raising children is the same thing. I have 3 kids, and the idea of, hang up your jacket, put out your shoes in the shelf when you come home, don't leave them all in front of the door. They empathize with that thought when they've grown up, moved out, and have kids of their own. Then they get it. And sometimes it takes that long. It's not you can't tell, you have to show, you have to involve them. And I think getting this sense of empathy, once you get over that, then you can start doing something else. Before that, it's just talking. It doesn't work very well.
Great, yeah, I still struggle with the old shoes and jacket thing. So, Jack, it'd be good to expand on sort of how it's been applied within the Ministry of Justice. I'd like to understand expand on the talk, because you've got lots of things going on there, and it's a difficult subject matter to apply it to. So
Yeah, sure. So kind of back to your point, we don't actually go into teams and kind of introduce ourselves as service designers. What we're trying to do is supply what we're calling user-centered design, and that's maybe an older term and it's not as cool at the moment, but we're supplying user-centered design skills to other people's teams. So we're not trying to take the problem away from people, because some of the problems are really cool to be working on, and to say that you're kind of going to solve this big problem is quite a cool thing to go home and say that you're doing. So we're not trying to take that away from people. We're just trying to help them to solve it in new ways. So we're not going in and bulldozing people's methodologies and ways that they've approached it for sometimes years and years and years. Instead, we're saying, do you want to try approaching this in a different way? And this is where it's worked in other places. So to kind of go back to your point around what we're doing, we're kind of making it up as we go along, actually. So I mentioned some of the big problems we've got in the Ministry of Justice. We've got people leaving prison and they go on to reoffend, so clearly the prison service isn't working. We've got loads of people going to court for things they don't need to do, so clearly the court service isn't working. We've got online crime massively growing, and we don't have a court system or a police service that can deal with that. So we've got loads of problems to solve, but no one's told us how we can solve them. So there isn't a book that we can turn to that says, this is how to solve these public sector type problems where you've got vulnerable users, you can't run experiments in the same way, and this is how you measure success, because no one's really done that. So one of the really hard things is, how do we measure, the impact of reducing trauma on someone's life, because it's not just about how much money is coming in and hitting the bottom line. And as I said, no one's done that before, so we're kind of developing it as we go. So yeah, that's kind of, we started doing that 2 years ago with one team in family justice, and I think Roman started working on the very start of that, actually, which is kind of cool. And that team has kind of blossomed, it's now our flagship. But we made a lot of mistakes doing that, and what was quite nice was that we had the freedom and the space to make mistakes. Often in government, when there's a bit of a crisis, everyone gets involved, and it's a really good opportunity to try new things, and that's exactly what the case was in family justice. And what was really good, I guess, after Roman left, is it got even more chaotic and more of a crisis, so we really had to do something. And that allowed us to try out new things, like how do you prototype national policy? How do you go and do research with vulnerable parents or children? And now we're solving some of the really big problems in the organisation with the teams that are there to try and solve them. So we're not trying to take them away, we're trying to solve them with them. Does that answer your question?
You've got, so with an organisation with something as vast as Ministry of Justice, is there a priority order? How do you prioritise what takes precedence when trying to solve even just one vertical inside of that? Yeah, so we've got kind of, I guess, we've only got a limited capability and capacity in our team. So we've got 3 teams to work across the Ministry of Justice in this way. We've got other teams that are doing other things, but these are the 3 teams to work with policy. And we've basically got 2 ways to prioritise it. What's about to fall over and burst into flames, and what does the minister want to achieve? Because I think in government, if you don't have money, if you can't show benefit, and thirdly, if you don't have political will to do something, things move very slowly. So we only want to work on things where things can move fast. So
we have a kind of priority list of the kind of things we want to work on, and the Ministry of Justice has got a list of things they want us to work on, and we meet somewhere in the middle, if that makes sense.
It's great. Does anyone else want to jump in with good examples of service design?
Well, I mean, I can add to the ministry stuff. The buy-in, I think, is crucial. So that there's a political motivation behind it. And when I worked on the last project at the Ministry of Justice, where we mapped the legal aid agency, the organization, to understand how they perform, how many IT systems they are using, how many steps you have to go through as a customer in order to receive legal aid. We had Matthew Coates, I think at the time was the head of the legal aid agency. He said, I want that done. I need to know how my organization performs and where the problems are. And just with that buy-in, it opened up a lot of doors to collaborate with a multidisciplinary team. And then we used service design tools and methodologies like the customer journey mapping to map it all out, being able to compare all of this. And we then decided as a team, rather than writing up a report which nobody reads, to go for a more like an advertising pitch. So luckily the background kicked in again, and we tried to limit ourselves to 25 pages. So how can you outline the one with 25 pages? And this worked really well because people got it, and you don't give them too much to think about. Exactly the pointers. If you then want to go into the details, well, we've got the Google Drive with all the research and all the things in there. So, and another example is maybe not as hard as Jack described it, but I received a letter from the Ministry of Justice or from HMRC and said, you paid too much taxes for 2015. So there are two options for you now. Either you let it sit there for 20 working days, then we send you a check, you go to your bank, you cash it in, fine. If you want to have the money earlier, create an account with us in a minute or so, and then all the communication will be dealt over that account from future onwards. And then you should have the money in your account within 3 to 5 working days. And I said, yeah, I'm a user, I want to save paper and go digital. I'm a service designer. I want to see how the system is. So I tested it. Was swift, was 1 minute or something like this. I applied, and then 2 days later, I got the money in my account. And I mean, this is just a small example of how public service works now, going into the right direction. But I thought, this is amazing. And yeah, so.
I think we've kind of got to this weird point where we're getting a bit of a clusterfuck of how big the problems are. So you asked what is good service design, and in family justice we've progressed to a point where we're looking at an end-to-end system. So you mentioned legal aid. Actually, if you look at legal aid journey from A to B, someone applying to get money to get a lawyer, that's great, and we can make it work. But if you look at it in the bigger context, we find people don't even know that they can get legal aid, so they never even apply. And what we've found is in this family justice context that the problem's even bigger than that, because actually Department for Work and Pensions are looking at how we can make sure that we reduce parental conflict so parents stay in work, and then Department for Community and Local Government are looking at how do we help local authorities help parents with high conflict. And so what we've realised we're doing is actually starting to recreate some of the problems in a nicer way, because we're just working in a silo. So our next challenge now is how do we work across these silos, across a massive user journey, to try and streamline what government does for actually quite a small proportion of families, and actually make that provision better as a result as well.
And I guess sort of one question about that would be, I think a lot of what service design does is about, going into organizations that have sort of big silos and quite siloed thinking, and creating that sort of unity and getting that shared understanding around it. So to what extent, do you think you can be a force for kind of creating that shared understanding or bringing those people together to kind of unify them around things?
So we're quite good at doing that inside of the MOJ. There's a lot more we could do, but we've got this kind of quite handy trick up our sleeve, which is GDS and the Cabinet Office. Mm-hmm. So in this situation, we've drawn in them, because what's quite hard for us is to say, we're the Ministry of Justice, but we want everyone else to think about this in a completely neutral way. And honestly, we're thinking about it in a neutral way too. Mm-hmm. It's really, really hard to do that, partly because we feel the pain of other people's bad service design because they end up in court. Mm-hmm. and they're quite happy with doing that because they don't bear the cost of that in a way. And so what we can do is pull in Cabinet Office and say, actually, this is a new thing. And GDS have been very helpful with that, and they're developing an idea called a community of practice or service community to try and pull together that strand across departments, which is unbelievably difficult. But that's our little trick to pull in outsiders, basically.
Margus, did you had an example on banking, I believe?
Well, yeah, but
You did about 10 minutes ago.
yeah. Well, mine is not quite that complicated. I mean, we just, and I think this has been replicated in different places of the world. But it was just a realization that we had one task. We were training a bank how to do service design themselves, but the other thing was to come up with a service. How do we get people who don't save money to save money? Well, that was sort of the task. And the solution to that was based on very simple observation of how people actually handle cash. Is that when you're paying with cash, you end up with coins in your pocket. You go home and you put them in a jar. No brainer. You can do that digitally. And if you do that digitally, it means that every time you use your payment card, you round up to the next zero, and you drop those little cents or whatever they are in a digital coin jar, and you hide it from the owner, basically. So what happens is that a person who, if you're paying for everything with your card, which you tend to do in Northern Europe, at the end of the year you end up with 100 or 200 euros, and you have proof for every person who doesn't save money that, hey, I can save money. And the next step is then to set savings goals and get them on there. And I think Citi has done the same thing. I think a bank in the UK has done the same thing. So in that sense, the same idea comes to many people in different places based on the same behavior. But I think that was exactly that. It's a service that everybody loved, but it was an incredibly difficult thing to get the bank to do right, because they went back and said, okay, this is a savings product. A savings product requires a contract. A contract requires stipulations. One of the stipulations, you don't get to take your money out for 3 months if you want to, otherwise you have to pay a penalty, at which point the interest of the customer would be 0. So they sent us the prototype. We sent, no, go back to what the idea was. It's easy in, easy out. There's a button. Say yes, no, that's it. And then it came back to their manual of how they build a savings product. It came back exactly the same way, and went back again. But finally, they did it the way it was supposed to be. So it was everybody could just go into the internet bank, says, yes, I want this, and it starts working immediately. And you don't know how much money you have there. And then when you go into the internet, hey, look at that, there's 25 euros. Hey, I can buy something. Look, I can save money. Simple.
Great, thank you. I guess it would be good to look at for the audience to understand perhaps how they could influence sort of bringing about a culture of service design within their organisations. I know, Roman, you've talked about sort of having someone who's a champion or ambassador. I'll hand over to you, and you can just...
That's basically the answer.
That's right, the next question.
So, I mean, I said it in the talk, and I mean, everybody here on the panel can probably nod with their heads and agree to this. Those processes take a lot of time. The first hurdles is the whole trust issue. There's a new team, people feel threatened about their original way of working. They don't understand really what you do because it's still this kind of new word. Within Tesco, as an example, within retail, they have very own words and abbreviations, and we are the GDP whatever and GMO this and that, and so you have to first figure out what the actual environment is and how you fit in. And then I think again, getting the trust, showing them what you can do. Once you achieve the trust, then it's more about supporting them, because you want to educate them, you want them to do it, not to do it for them. And this takes a lot of time. I say it again, I said it in my presentation, it took us a year to kind of get to a first, okay, there's this team called Digital Customer Experience, and we kind of get that they can help us with things we are not good at, and they're not here to threaten our jobs. And so, this takes time. That's why most of the change programs and transformation programs. If you think of the Deutsche Telekom, the major telco communication in Germany, it took them 3 years to train 1,300 people with design thinking or design, human-centered design, whatever you want to call it. It took them 3 years to get this amount of people trained, accredited, and then with this they've been able to push for a culture change in the organization. Same with SAP. When I talked to Tobias Haug, the head of the innovation unit at SAP, said it took us 3 years to get to this point, and then you develop all this really nice thing and all the really nice platforms, and then suddenly it is not successful because people don't update their software to the new version, which is actually much more helpful and more efficient because it costs money. So they still use the old systems, and then we're going back into this cycle again. So you need patience, you need time, you need to be persistent, you need to communicate a lot, you need to hustle a lot, and a minimum for 1 year. So this is not an easy 9 to 5 job if you go in-house.
Try going out of house. It's even different. We had one client that we work with. Like I said, we're a service designing and branding consultancy. We had one client come to us in 2009 with one task. Can you put 7 logos on one business card? That was a task. It was sort of interesting. Anyway, but what we did, we did that, but we said we want to talk to you and talk about that. And they had lots of different businesses, and one of them was a bookstore, where they're basically a bookseller. And we went there with just with their business card with 7 logos, which was terrible, and with one story. And we started working with them, and now they're the biggest cinema and entertainment chain in the Baltic. So they went from bookstore to cinema, and under that journey, I mean, eventually they finally started understanding what it means to actually look at customer behavior and what it does, what they're doing. Why are people buying books? They're buying books to spend free time on. So what else can you spend free time on? And then the questions started coming, but this transformation, I mean, the whole the project is ongoing in that sense. But it took 5 years to get to that point where suddenly their growth is their loyalty, customer loyalty and spending increased. Like loyalty increased 300%. Each instance of expenditure went out something like 60 or 70%. I mean, ridiculous numbers. And the fact that they actually tied all their different, they have, they make coffee, they have coffee shops, they have kiosks, they have bookstores, they are selling PlayStation games, they have cinema, they have, everything. But it's all tied into one thing, that this is where you're spending your free time. And that, I mean, just twisting that thinking around, it took a long time, but finally when they recognized, they started doing themselves, and now we're just, we're coming in to give them a second opinion, because you become, in Swedish there's a term called hemmablind, which means home blind. Basically, you can't see your own mess anymore. So you need somebody to come and say, but you need less and less and less and less. Basically, we train the whole company, but it takes a long time.
I think part of it too within organizations is looking at sort of why people do what they do within that company. And oftentimes, if you look at the way that people perform their roles in a company, it's based on what they're actually measured on. People perform to the expectations that are set for them. And oftentimes they perform based on, if they're a salesperson, they're measured on, how much of the product they sold or the service they sold or how much new business they won and so on and so forth. So I think, one of the ways to kind of, implement and ensure this kind of, within companies, this dedication to service design or design thinking and these new skills, one is certainly to, be training them and upskilling them and doing the work with them to show them the ways. But until it becomes something that's, that they're actually measured on and is part of their sort of day job, and something that their superiors and the rest of their peers will ask them to do, or ask them to show evidence that they're actually performing these things, I don't think you're ever going to see kind of a huge uptake in it. Eventually you will after years, but that's one of the ways I think you can ensure it.
That's a very good point. I sometimes have the feeling you do all this kind of exercises of upskilling and try to implement it into their day-to-day work. If we're not able to pull out the data and say, this is actually the impact we created, and this person came on the training, got 3-4 badges for the training, is now at a certain level, this then makes a distinction of when service design becomes visual and successful. And if we don't do that, then it always is just a nice design exercise. Hey, some people coming in and they do this nice engaging stuff.
And then it's the follow-up after the training. So you've had the training. Where's the follow-up sort of 2-3 months after that says, okay, so-and-so went on this training, they had this thing. What has their performance been, over the past 2 or 3 months? How have they actually used this in their day-to-day role or to make a change within their organization? So, which speaks to even a larger part of, of looking at how does that organization look at its people and sort of, get and give feedback on those things.
And it's interesting, the organizations are not set up to do that. So I saw that in the Ministry of Justice, and I see that with Tesco now, you have the end of the year review. And we just had a talk in our break where Margus said, have the starting point and say, what is it that I want to do? And then spend the whole year, and at the end of the year review, reflect on if you did it or not, and why is that? And that's exactly how can you measure a good performance if you don't track it?
I think we kind of, when we talk about transformation, it's quite kind of a fluffy word though. We've got to have a plan about what that means. And I've done training for so many different organizations and teams within different organizations, and often it doesn't stick because there's no plan behind it. People just want to deliver some training. And one of the really great things that we try and use and hold in our head is this idea of communities of practice. There's a book by Emily Webber which explains it really, really well. But in a community of practice, you want to have a bell curve of people's skill levels within that. So you don't want everyone to be a brilliant service designer, because actually what you're going to do with all the brilliant service designers, they're probably going to leave and go and do something else more interesting somewhere else. You want to have the new blood who are just learning it, and actually probably the more senior ones, more experienced ones are going to spend a lot of time training the new blood, and you want to have like the middle, which makes up the majority of your organization, who know what it is. And so we're not trying to get to a point where everyone is an expert designer or an expert understanding design or how it can be applied. We want to make sure we're kind of applying it in an intelligent way. Equally, there's no point, slaving over a team or individuals which just don't want to learn it. So it's also about trying to find those people who can become those ambassadors and they want to make a difference. They're annoyed by having to work in a certain way, and they want to work in different ways. And the second thing I think that we're thinking about quite hard is maturity models, so that we can actually track an organization from being immature across different levels of maturity in user-centered design and service design, so that we can actually say, actually, this organization is at this level, and to get it to that level, these are the things that have worked in the past, rather than just randomly deploying kind of tactics across across organizations because we think they're cool. We're trying to be systematic about what we deploy and why.
So this is actually, thank you, gents. It was interesting insight there. So this was 4 gins in last night, Roman. This is your question that you wanted to put to the other panelists. So I've got it highlighted there. But
see, now I remember. How could service design solve the Brexit? We had a very engaging discussion, and he asked me, in 5 years, 10 years, how is this? And I said, dude, that's boring. We have other problems. And so how could service design solve the Brexit? Can it solve the Brexit? That would be a question.
What do you mean by solve?
Well, I'm an optimist, okay? So I believe Great Britain did a mistake, and they will realize it, and then hopefully they come to the positive solution of saying, well, could we maybe come back to the EU? And the EU, because we are forgiving, we will say, of course.
I think there's two things. One is the kind of government response to it, which is that there are teams of people trying to solve Brexit, I guess. So again, thinking about GDS and what they're doing is really brilliant. Service designer there called Tommy Morgan. And he's trying to classify all government services and prioritize them based on how Brexit's going to impact them. And then he's trying to draw communities around services to try and work across what service design looks like in the future in a non-European kind of landscape. And I think that's really interesting. The other side of it, though, is that we kind of need to change the way voting works. So there are kind of, not in government, but there are organisations like Democracy Club, for example, which are looking at how does voting work, and should we start to think of voting as a service, and should we kind of take this pretty kind of 18th, 17th century view of how to run a country and update it a little bit using technology. And I think some of the kind of, there's good examples of that elsewhere in the world. So I think Iceland have done some interesting thinking around that as well. So I think there's two sides of the coin, I think.
I think, I mean, if we say, can we solve Brexit hypothetically, or like metaphorically speaking, then I think Brexit and Trump and Erdogan and all those things are actually in the same sphere of problem. And the problem is a lack of, I mean, the educational system is actually failing. That's the root cause of not being able to look at information and make some deductions and understand what's actually going to happen, what is true, what is not, how to critically view information, how to understand news. All those things are, if we don't teach that at a school level, and we focus on wrong kinds of issues, and then we're not creating an educated electorate, and by definition we end up in these kinds of problems where people vote against their own interests because they just don't understand what the impact is. And that's a solution to Brexit, but it's metaphorically speaking, because it's going to take generations, and it requires the educational system to change, actually. I mean, the election system is comes later, but we need to teach kids to look at information and not take everything seriously. I mean, there was a joke somewhere that the only time we look at information critically is the 1st of April, because it might be wrong.
I think that's a very London-centric point of view, though.
I'm Swedish.
If we educate kids better, they'll vote better. I mean, they don't vote in the first place, isn't that the problem? I
mean, that's part of it. I mean, where does civic responsibility come from? I mean, if we don't teach it, we don't talk about it, then politics is run by old white people. I mean, that's part of the problem. But I mean, I think very many things are tied to how we educate our kids. I mean, if you take a very, very completely different topic, but obesity in general, the amount of physical exercise we do in school has dropped dramatically from the time when I was in school. We had like 4 or 5 hours of running around. Now I think my kids maybe 2 or 1.5, and then it drops off the second they get into higher level schools, like 9, 10, 11th grade. It basically is optional. I mean, they don't even show up anymore. And then they sit down for the rest of their lives instead of in front of screens doing something. Where do you learn this stuff if you don't learn it as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, it's going back to one of the earlier points, and there was something that Margus said earlier about empathy being one of the most important things. And I think thinking about the whole Brexit situation or the Trump situation, it's empathy on the part of the politicians for not just their base, but actually the entire electorate, and understanding what the real problems are. And understanding how they can serve their entire electorate and not sort of use these political processes just to score sort of cheap points. I don't think there would have been a vote on Brexit if David Cameron didn't feel like he was sort of forced to do that, and if the people really understood, what the needs are of the electorate, I think they would make very different decisions.
There's an interesting quote. Jean-Paul Juncker, I think, said it, that we all know what the right decision is. We just don't know how to get re-elected if we make it.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. They say don't mention religion and politics at the dinner table, but bring it back onto sort of like the career path for service designers, and where are the sort of bright sort of sparks in service design going to come from for in the coming years? And is there a particular kind of way in or a discipline around sort of psychology, like developers, designers, who could?
I mean, I think one of the great things about this discipline in service design, the other disciplines that have kind of fed into it, is the diversity that underlies it. That that actually, to me, it seems that it's been a discipline that's made up of people from scores of different backgrounds. You talk to people, and in the business origami workshop we had earlier, there was someone that, he mentioned he was a developer for a while, and then he couldn't handle learning a new framework like every 2 days or whatever. But you have people that come from a development background, or from an analytics background, or from an art background, or so on. And I think that's one of the things that's made this community as rich as it is all the different people and all their different backgrounds making different kind of contributions to it. So I think it's great that there's educational opportunities out there to give people sort of a basic set of skills. But I think it's really underlined by, maybe an understanding of the basic set of skills, but then people drawing upon their own experiences to kind of make it their own. They have to find their voice, and they have to practice it, I think, in the way they can. And so I don't think there's any one thing that they can do to be a great service designer and get into service design. It's really understand the fundamentals, kind of make it your own, and then contribute something to the community.
Yeah. I think great points. Pulling the empathy in as well. You have to think about nowadays, what is it that you want? And there are multiple opportunities. You have Hyper Island, and you have this IX Academy or something like this. You have General Assembly. If you want to learn something quickly and pay for that because you're a professional, then you have those options there. If you want to go into academia, you could do a couple of master courses. There are multiple universities offering MA service design things, but it's really up to what do you want to get out of it in a way. So that's the first personal decision. And then with the empathy, that's why I called the workshop yesterday with the problem framing and empathy building workshop on the difficulty of problem framing, because I wanted people to do it. And I think this is the most important bit. All the people from the different backgrounds should come in because this is beneficial for the holistic development, just to get that in there. The more diverse the team is, the more beneficial it is for the service you really create. But you have to do it, and you have to do it multiple times to get really comfortable with it. Because if you work in-house or work for an agency and then go to the company, they expect you to know your stuff and help them, guide them through the process. So you need this experience up front before you do that.
I think for us, we hate it when we have people come through the door and they say, I'm a senior service designer. What we really want to do is find people who say, I want to solve big problems. And for us, service design thinking is a mindset. It's not a qualification or a set of skills. Really interested to know how people think their backgrounds and the skills and the things they've done in the past can enable them to solve big problems and add to the kind of toolbox that we've already got. So I completely agree with you. It's not the diversity is a positive. And it's not a kind of restrictive constraint. It's actually about opening up that box, not making it bigger and broader, I think.
Yeah, when I think about my master, just to add to that, we had 26 people, and we had people who worked for Samsung as designers. And this company is aware that they need to train their employees. So they found the course, they obviously figured something out. The company pays for them to attend the course for 2 years, and then they are coming back, bringing that back into the industry. And the guys who came with us, we had a couple of designers from South Korea who've been straight out of uni, started with Samsung, then got the opportunity to do their master. We had senior designers who worked for many years on apps and really shipped great things. Millions of people came to the course. We had a 55-year-old Finnish business consultant who had her own business and wanted to go into that. We had Germans, of course. You need a healthy dose of Teutonic efficiency once in a while. so it was a really mixed group, and then suddenly it does not. The challenge for the team to work together is not where you are from and what is your skill set and what did you do before. It's really the language, the empathy. How do we communicate? How do we narrow down the problem? And this then makes you even more open to work in a multidisciplinary team.
I think the real fragility of service design as a concept is that lots of people are doing it whether or not they recognize themselves as service designers. So to be a developer, you at least have to be able to code, and then you probably think you're a developer, which is kind of okay. But to be a service designer, you don't have to recognize that you're a service designer. You can be making a service or designing a service without really applying a methodology to it. So if you make service design kind of a restrictive thing that only certain people can access with certain qualifications or skills, then the people who could really benefit from service design aren't able to do it. They don't get to come along the path and become brilliant service designers that they could become. And I think that's kind of the kind of contradiction of service design as well.
Thank you. What are you doing in your organisations to attract younger talent for service design?
They come all by themselves. I mean, there is a lineup at the door in that sense. But it's what how I try to qualify them is actually by I mean, like you said, it's a mindset. And the way we look at who we want to retain and who we don't want to retain maybe is a better question. And it's really about people understanding that they're looking at how they can create value for somebody else, not for just for themselves, and getting that across. And I have this very, very simple test for that. And it's actually just a calendar invite. If you're organizing a meeting with somebody and you're sending a calendar invite saying that meeting with Margus, and you're sending it to me, it doesn't help me in my calendar 3 weeks in advance, because, I mean, I'll see it in 3 weeks and I go, what's this? I have no idea. So the question is, when do they sort of get to the point where they understand that they have to invite me so that the calendar invite makes sense to everyone at the same time? And that's creating value for someone else. And getting to that step, that using this every day, in everyday small things, that how will somebody else understand what I'm doing? Does it make sense, and does it add value to someone else? That's when I know I have a person that I can work with, because that's when they start, I mean, then it becomes automatic. Before that, they're always struggling about, okay, what is this? I'm doing this, why doesn't it work? But when they finally, you know, looking at it from the customer's point of view, the other person's point of view, that this makes sense, then I have somebody that I can work with.
I think we're a really bad panel to be asked that question, because we're all white guys, and really to get young talent into things like service design and tackling big problems, you need to create role models that people can look up to and say, actually, I want to do that. So within our team in Ministry of Justice, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create diversity among the people we've got on the team. We're thinking about how we can do that in a really wide sense. So the Ministry of Justice is going to launch a employment strategy for prisoners, and as part of that, we're going to employ 10 prisoners in the ex-prisoners in the Ministry of Justice. And I'd be really interested in how we, for example, can take advantage of that in the design team when we're trying to solve problems for prisoners. So there's things like that we should be doing more of, and we're doing some of it already.
Yeah, the recruitment is a tricky bit. Because you have obviously the organization and they don't have headcount, so I also, that's why we do talks, that's why we talk about the work and what we offer and what we do, and people obviously get excited and say, this is really cool what you guys do. Do you by any chance have a job? And I would love to get in contact with people and do the interviews and set it all up and really understand how people think, and if they kind of a little bit bright or think ahead. But if you don't have the headcount, that's one of the issues. And whenever I go to universities here and do presentations or do workshops with them, I always say to them, you probably have it easier if you go into a smaller agency, learn a little bit the basics. We had that before. They have a tool set or a set of tools which works for them. You can learn that, so you have that experience already, and then you go somewhere else, but you get at least the basics. And sometimes it just needs time to open up the right spot. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're Hiveworks. We're a small company, so we don't, we're not hiring sort of loads and loads of people. But to put someone on the spot for a minute, Claudia, can you come up here for a minute? So Claudia is the newest addition to the team at Hiveworks. Round of applause, please. And Claudia is not a white male. And so, although she might be turning bright red with me putting the focus on her. So what did we do to attract you?
Okay. Well, for Hiveworks, it was kind of easy. I was working for a really big company. It was called Gensler. And they did basically interior design, and they're architects. And I think architects really need service designers, because not all architects think about the person that's going to use the building. Like, surprisingly, they care a lot about aesthetics still. So I loved Hiveworks. I loved the office. It was quite bright, and one of my best friends worked at Hiveworks, and she was leaving the office, and she was like, "Do you want to take my cool job?" So that's how I got to Hiveworks.
You really attracted the talent there. Amazing.
Yeah, it's the Facebook model.
Yeah.
One front in, one out.
And I think, yeah, I could work really flexibly in Hiveworks. And yeah, that's it.
Could I just add, for us, with bigger organizations, it's sometimes also challenging when you have the headcount. It's difficult to get juniors in, because this kind of implies training, and you have to kind of set them up to the task, which I would love to do, because you can make them aware of the politics, you can make them aware of the environment, of the culture, so they're already set up in a better way and are part, and not coming in as a alien service design. We don't know what that is, but business most of the time requires, and managers then make the final decision to get in at least a mid-weight or a senior, because they think this will then ensure that they can work with the stakeholders and with the colleagues. So there is sometimes, unfortunately, this disbalance where the business, the company is not risk aware enough, or is not willing to take the risk of saying, this person is bright, is young, yes, needs a little bit of experience, but that's why we are here. That's why we are in a more senior position, and that's why we kind of get them slowly into the business in the right way. And yeah.
And I think sometimes, I mean, that it's a very interesting difference between the disciplines of service design and user experience. I think in user experience, when I was working at LBI, we had a fairly robust internship program in UX. We were always interested in getting juniors in. I mean, we had a very big team at one point. We had about 40 or 45 people just in UX. So we had a lot of the scale to be able to do that in the types of projects. But we were always interested in getting in kind of a lot of younger people that then we could help grow and shape, and and they could become really invested in the company. I think with service design, in some ways, it's slightly more challenging, because the nature of the work that service design is doing is less kind of deliverable and production focused, and it is more sort of consultative and involving, and it oftentimes it requires, especially if you're in a smaller company, but even in a larger one, it requires people who have a bit of experience, to be able to talk to sort of a wide range of people from different disciplines, and have these conversations around, are you coming in to take my job, or why are you telling me about this thing? And sometimes you need people who are at a bit of a higher level to be able to do those things. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting contrast between the two.
Great, thanks. I've noticed this, like when advertising for UX roles, that people can apply and have UX in their title, but not necessarily know sort of the disciplines. Are you sort of seeing that in service design at all? Are you seeing people starting to use it in job titles, or sort of claiming roles?
I think there's way too many people who say they do service design. I mean, the title is going around in many places, but the impact is lacking.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm much calmer about this topic now, but if you would have asked me this a year ago, I would probably just start a real rant now. Because the thing, one of the issues is, you know, there are obviously General Assembly, Hyper Island, these models of providing education for payment in a short period of time, and RED, obviously. Well, wait for it. Yeah, exactly. Wait for it. So RED is better. RED Academy is better. They are there for a reason, because people have less time. They want to add this kind of certain skill set. But if you think about that, sometimes people call themselves service designers, and they had a weekend workshop, been exposed to a very basic amount of the tools. And like I said before, if you go into companies and you're supposed to help them, you need to really know your stuff. And then I compare these people and say, I'm a service designer, I do this, and yes, it's a mindset, whatever, but I studied 2 years. I showed a educational institution that I'm worth of a certificate of a master of service design, because I went through the projects and I delivered the service for diabetes type 2 and worked for real users and worked with the Design Museum and worked with the Ministry of Justice and worked with dementia care. So I proved that I'm a service designer. So there's always this kind of fight in my head of, yeah, well, I mean, that's the industry now that people take it, and on the other side, but man, I pulled in my weight, you know, I did all the stuff, and I'm a service designer, right? So, yeah. So,
I guess I'm the opposite of you, but I'm not a service designer, so maybe that's why. But we don't really mind what people call themselves. We're happy for people to call themselves service designers if they're just at the start of that journey. I think it goes back to the thing that, yeah, you can't really call yourself a lawyer or a doctor without being a lawyer and a doctor. But being a service designer, it goes back to, if it's kind of better for people to admit they're designing services, because then at least they're on that journey of saying, how can I become a better service designer? Whereas if they're just saying, I run a business, and this is all I do. You know, they're not on that journey of how can they improve that service and, you know, deliver more value to users. So at least if they're saying I'm a service designer, they want to improve as a service designer. So we're kind of happy. We don't mind what people call themselves.
Are there any questions from the crowd? Have we got any?
The crowd.
Yeah. Oh, back there. Those in the back, just quiet down. So we're just going to listen to the ones that are here at the front, maybe secondary.
Other than academia, is there any tools and resources that you might recommend, books or anything that kind of...
So to just clarify, because it doesn't come through. So other than academia, are there other resources that you would recommend?
I mean, I think certainly, the Practical Service Design Slack channel that I think, you know, a lot of people are members of. There's a invite available. I think it's on the Practical Service Design site, but that one is quite a really good resource, and, you know, leverages a worldwide community, you know, sharing examples and different thoughts and things like that. I think that's a really good resource.
IDEO runs some really good free stuff. The Human-Centered Design Toolkit's good, and they regularly run kind of an open and free Human-Centered Design course, which is focused on real problems, and you can form a kind of team. It doesn't have to be geographically located to try and solve that problem through a Human-Centered Design process. It's not service design per se, but it's one of the tools you would definitely use in that, in using a service design approach. I think it's a really brilliant course.
I use Google. There's a lot on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the books, I mean, the classic book is the Service Design Thinking, a black one, quite thick. They have now Service Design Doing as well. I like it.
I've tried reading that Service Design Thinking 600 times. I can't get past 3 pages. It's terribly written. It's valuable as a reference book, but as a readable book, I think it's not legible. But I mean, Service Design Network has, I mean, they do their conferences and stuff. There's servicedesignTools.org. It's actually just a reference, like you said, IDEO. And there's so many references on the internet that once you start going, you can always find something. The thing that you need is a little bit of understanding of what it's about, and then you can really Google your way. There's so much information that it's just impossible to say where to go.
A lot of books, a lot of shows. You have the service design show now, on which is posted on LinkedIn regularly. It's a Dutch guy, Mark Fontaine or something like this, and you've got Liveworks published their own service design book with case studies of their work with their clients. So I mean, there's a huge amount of things out there.
You can buy my book. It's on Amazon.
Great. Hold on. I'm going to give you the mic.
I'm sorry if you already covered this, but and to get bogged down in terminology as well. But in my organisation, we have like people who are like customer experience experts, and I was just wondering. It feels like that's the same thing as service design, but is that a different discipline? Is it the same? Is it just trying to come at the same problem in a different way, or do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, terminologically speaking, in the US, they call service design customer experience design. So I mean, there is the customer experience professionals. Some of it may be terminology, some of it may be a different way of thinking. I mean, that's the problem with the whole discipline. It's almost impossible to say exactly what service design is. A few years ago at the Service Design Network conference, the members' day discussion was, could we redesign the name of service design because nobody understands what it means. I mean, that was how bad it was.
We don't have customers, so we can't really use that because people don't choose whether they want to use our services often. So that's why we don't use the term customer experience design.
But you would then call it citizen experience designer, consultant,
Not all of our
service
users are
manager, senior
That's the problem, right?
manager.
Design for everyone. Human.
Can I see your
maybe.
business card? Not 7 logos, but like
Yeah.
unfold it. It's like manager.
All the things.
I was just going to say, maybe we should just call them humans and get away from customers.
Do you think the complexity doesn't help or lend itself to being understood in sort of the boardroom?
I mean, in the boardroom, we have to talk business. That's in that sense, what you said earlier, that if you have really junior people coming along and you're working on a fairly consulting level, they struggle with talking to a CEO that's 55. They're talking using lots of acronyms and everything they learned at school. But it's about designing businesses, actually. It's about designing services, or I mean, business as a service that. You're talking, return on investment, how you're going to do it, what teams you're going to organize, how you can leverage this inside the business, what you can, that it doesn't disrupt anything, and that kind of discussion is hard to have. But that you need to know as well. I mean, it is a consulting job in that sense. It's not just we can fix your service, yes, but the biggest challenge becomes the organizational change, and they won't go for it unless you can make them comfortable that it's not going to, it's not going to make it go the other way. So.
Margus, some very young people sit in boardrooms.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's a state of mind in that sense. There are 20-year-olds or 15-year-olds that can speak to the boardroom level, but it's a matter of really, in that sense, projecting some kind of life experience and confidence. And some people have it, and some people will get there. They don't have it, and you shouldn't let them do it. It's like this. It used to be earlier in my career that when we do a presentation for a client, somehow when we have a team going, everybody had to say something. No. The best person speaking speaks. Everybody else just sits down and is there because you don't want people who can't present. There's no value in that. So I mean, everybody doesn't have to do everything.
I mean, I think I don't necessarily agree with that because I think we're in a space where there isn't a rule book for how to do things, and so we're trying to develop it, and the only way we can develop it is by getting people to do it, and no one's very good at it when they walk through the door. So our first project, we had some really senior people come and join the team, and it was supposed to take 12 weeks, and it took about 24 weeks. And that's because they just didn't understand the context, and it took a long time. But there's no one to turn to say, you should be presenting and not you, because no one's particularly good at it. I also think that now we're working in kind of a space where actually we're working with technology, that means there isn't an expert in this. And the expert has been doing it for 2 years, and that person could be 26 or they could be 55. So, how do you use like Snapchat for marketing and things like that? And again, I think it's about trying to find the mindset that fits the problem and fit the problem, the team around the problem. I think we're trying to be as agile as we can with the kind of skills and people we put around the problems.
I mean, I work with paying customers, so there's a little bit of different situations. I agree. I mean, everybody has to learn to do it, but when it's when you're there's a difference between practicing and competing. And when you're practicing, yes, everybody should, but when you're competing, you'll go to win. So those situations are different.
Even in our context, we're often competing with Deloitte and others to work with the teams on the problems that we want to work with. And that's because, again, we're a new team with a new set of skills in government, and it's quite easy for existing teams to kind of go, actually, we prefer to work with the Deloitte team because they've got a big name and they must know how to do it. And so we do have to be quite good at competing still, I think.
And that comes back to the old, there's an expression saying nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. So, I mean, you're in the same thing. It's Deloitte is, it's 10 times more expensive, but it's a sure bet because you covered your own ass for that. So, I mean, there's a risk on the buyer's side, and they have to, they have to want to do it differently.
Okay, so I don't know if there's any more questions. We're reaching the end. So just in less than 10 words, starting from Vincent, what advice would you give your 50-year-old self?
Be more holistic.
Jack?
Keep solving big problems.
Awesome.
Find a girlfriend.
Margus?
Just continue to enjoy what you do.
Awesome, thanks guys. So there you have it. That's an amazing kind of discussion around service design, and it's a meaty topic. So I thought it was great to hear your thoughts on it. Picked up a couple of key things here, which is a key skill for service design is empathy. Show, don't tell. Try to solve big problems and do more exercise. Can we have a little round of applause for these guys, and thanks.